Chapter 11 The Jazz Man. We had another visitor, just a few hours before the carnival, an old friend of the family who called himself the Jazz Man. A tear comes to my eyes, when I write this. This visit had to have brought back all forms of good and bad memories for grandmother. Earlier that year her life partner had passed. He was like a disorganized father to me, helped me with things in life, in his own way. In a lot of ways he was like Simon Jack, leaving me little clues about life, always watching. The funeral was nice as funerals could be. The good people of Red River would remember as soon as they forgot. Time moves quick for all but the wife. She was one of the lucky ones. She had a shoulder to cry on, and an ear that would listen. One of grandfather's war buddies, a black man from New Orleans. I never knew his real name, other than what grandmother called him and what he called himself, the Jazz Man. When asked he would say a lot of people had the jazz, but only a few could call themselves a bona fide jazz man. You could feel the jazz, but you had to know the jazz, and in order to do that, you had to shack up with a few women that would stab you in the back as you shook the hand of the devil. In a lot of ways, during this time he was grandmother's Black Knight. To us he was welcomed comic relief, and from dancing to singing he would help ease the fog, which settled in the house. He ensured people would know grandfather on his last day above ground. Our little town turned into New Orleans for a few hours. People came from all over to help out, to pay their respects. The army showed up with a 21-gun salute. It was a hard day. But grandfather got a proper New Orleans send-off, as Red River had its first and last Mardi Gras. There was much I didn't know about grandfather, I just didn't have the time. If you have the time to get to know someone, which lived more than his or her share, I implore you to sit down and have coffee with that person. In my later years I used to haunt nursing homes. Many think they are homes for people who have forgotten or have become lost in their years, but this is incorrect. The places we keep our old and dying, is storehouses of forgotten knowledge, knowledge we can't afford to lose. Luckily, for me my grandfather was a notorious journal writer and keeper. On the way into the main house, there was a massive bookcase, filled with his notes, journals, and papers. I guess this was a way for grandmother to keep him around, a shrine to say. Most of the journals were from his time in the war. There was one describing his time on a Navy ship. During the first part of the war he was stationed on a medical Navy ship. They would care for the worst of the injured, and run medical supplies to camps. One day when I was scanning over his journals, there was a passage that stood out to me. He recounts that on that day, many of the officers had went into the city, for some type of Navy dance. For many this was the only bit of shore leave they would get. He states that only one other officer and himself stayed behind to care for the sick and dying during the dance. Behind the boat, there was a strange viscous liquid. The liquid looked cool to the touch. Cool steam rose as the warm waves pushed the odd oil slick along. At first him and the officer thought there had been an oil leak from the ship, or maybe one of the Japs had a mini-sub that imploded. There was always rumors of tiny Japanese submarines watching the Navy. Grandfather said they could stay down for months, just one or two people, and sometimes they would fall asleep at the wrong time, and the submarine would crash into the ocean floor. This black liquid climbed its way up the side of the boat. The officer noted in his report that it was alive and that it had to have been some type of sea creature covered in oil. Grandfather was ordered to take a shovel and scoop it over the side. He did as he was told, but in doing so, he wrote that some of the black stuff made contact with his skin. He felt anger, sickness. He pushed as much as he could overboard, but the stuff just came back, over and over. Soon tiny little blobs slimed and slither about. Each would move toward the sick that was left on the boat. He noted that the little black slugs would crawl up onto the patients' beds, and slither their way into the ears of the sick. This passage would give me nightmares. I wondered what the black stuff was and what it was doing to the sick. The officer was the jazz man. After that, according to the journals, they stuck together, tackling job post together. As the war went on, it only got harder for everyone that was there. Soon the Navy ships couldn't handle the dying, so they built medical camps. Grandfather and the jazz man had to make weekly deliveries to each camp, supplies, medicine, food, and mail. When the mail ran, that is. Mail was rare, but it was a solder's friend. It reminded him of home and good things. We all like good things, when we are in bad places. As the war raged on and on, Grandfather and the jazz man had to move further and further into dark places. At some point in a solder's life, you realize you're here, there's nothing you can do about that, just move forward. I found myself hunting for journal entries about the black stuff he saw over there. In one such entry, they found themselves making a supply run for a new medical outpost. They had moved it further in, to give more medical support. This move was still early, bodies still laid smoking on the ground, the road to the medical camp was almost impassable, but they had their orders to get that shipment to that camp at all cost, even if they had to run over the bodies that blocked their way. This may have been what broke my grandfather, seeing people he had worked and fought with, creating a maze of smoking bodies. He noted the smell, burnt hair, and burnt bacon. There was times grandmother would cook and forget about what she was doing, sometimes she would burn the bacon, and grandfather would get up and leave, with tears in his eyes. Simple things had to been horrible reminders of his time over there. But the strong survive, until it's their time, I guess. The sounds, of breaking bodies under the large truck tires, a plopping sound, he writes, I will never be able to get over that sound. It reminded me of the moment a sinker or your fishing line hits the water. This is the same sound a human head makes when a large tire crushes it. We made our way slowly, he writes, with each mile, I get a grey hair, maybe Freya Neve, both me and Jazzman have the jumps. Each time we hear that damn plopping sound, I think I would rather be in a foxhole as the bombs fall. This is horrible. To make it worse, we got stuck in a large pool of mud made from human blood. We grabbed the chains, and put the truck into low, and slowly pulled out of the blood hole. I stayed outside the truck, guiding the jazz man. As he eased out of the pit, I told him to gun it. In doing so, I saw for myself what happens when I hear that plopping sound. The large wheels smashed, whatever was left of a person that was on the road, the tires rolled over the person's head, cracking like an egg. Something strange about it. Black stuff oozed out, spraying the tire well and the windows of our vehicle. This stuff was alive. Maybe it was some type of government project, but it hated the truck. I hopped in, as the jazz man slid over and gave her all she had. We both rolled the windows up on our large green Hope. The black stuff formed long oily black fingers, which tried to break the glass of our truck. The truck was not alive, so it fell off, and looking for something it could attach itself to. We rolled along, not giving much thought to the sounds or the smells we encountered. We made our delivery on time. They could always count on us, he wrote. Strange tales and weird events filled the journals that rested on that bookshelf, in that dusty old house. These were the adventures of a man that only wanted to come home to his family, to help his country when he was asked. Homes across the world have hidden stashes of books or letters and notes from people long lost. You may be surprised what you will find, if you find such a collection. Grandfather said something once I didn't understand until now. He said it was possible to bring the war home with a man. I asked the jazz man about the black stuff, and he said that evil oil spot followed us everywhere, when the war was over. There was always a black spot behind the boat. It moved with the waves, it moved with us. Once your grand pal got it on his shoe, just right on the hill. He was worried it got into him. Son, I think it did after the war. When he was at home, he was always fighting something in his head. Right after we got home, I still tagged along with him. We had become good friends, and back then we only had each other. It was me, and both your grandparents in that old Jeep. A couple of young kids started calling me names. Back then Red River wasn't a place for a black man. I saw your grandfather's eyes go black and glaze over. He grabbed a tool iron from the back, and drove it through the hood of their car. Back then people didn't have respect, many still don't, but that's life. The world is what we have made it. I bet you there are pools of that black stuff under each city. I once asked an old hoodoo woman what that stuff was. She said it was the stuff left over from people who lost their way to the light. It gets lonely in the dark, so they all pool together and make that stuff. When someone dies, they get ready to cross over and they're in a place where they can see us in darkness. As they move toward the light, black pools of this stuff form into creatures with tentacles, grabbing and pulling at the good ones. In hopes to add them to their collection of madness, son, this is why I think there are pools of this stuff under cities and graveyards. One day, just as it did during the war, we'll find a way to play with the living. Grandmother heard us talking, and she quickly got around to asking what had brought him to town. Apparently he had been asked to do some type of music thing for the carnival. He said times had been hard and then he was asked to do this, by the guy that owned White Wolf Entrainment. When asked where all they would go, he said Red River. And I thought, hey, it would give me chance to pop in on you. With that he did a little dance, tipped his hat and said, it's cash in my pocket and a cheap suit. Grandmother laughed a bit, and said, well, since you're going to be there, keep an eye on the kids if you would. Sure, he said with a smile, tipped his hat again saying, it was nice seeing you, maybe I can stop back by. You're welcome anytime. With that she closed the door. It seemed that something was worrying her, something I didn't understand. I went back to grandfather's journals. On the table beside an old inkwell, was a bit of paper. Written on it was a note, the devil or a leper could give you a hand, and it's all the same to a blind man. Be careful who gives you a helping hand, SJ. My carnival ticket felt warm from inside my pocket, almost stinging, burning. I reached in to grab it, pulling it out and looking it over. On the back was another note. Play that music, jazz man, tell them lies. Who is gonna sing the blues when you die? S.J.